Hello, dear friends. We are sincerely happy to welcome you again, and today we will talk to the esteemed Igor Mikhailovich Danilov.
Greetings.
Igor Mikhailovich, I would like to start today's conversation with the news that has attracted my attention, and if I may, I would like to read out some extracts from it.
Let's listen to it.
The Institute of Nuclear Physics of the Polish Academy of Sciences decided to experimentally test the long-standing, yet considered exotic hypothesis that changes in the intensity of cosmic radiation reaching the Earth can serve as a precursor to earthquakes. And the author of the study says, at first glance, the idea that there is a link between earthquakes and cosmic radiation in its primary form, reaching us mainly from the sun and deep space, may seem strange. However, its physical foundations are fully rational. So, in their research, Polish scientists have found a clear correlation between the intensity of the secondary cosmic radiation and the frequency of earthquakes with a magnitude of more than 4. We have discovered a truly existing phenomenon. It is so great.
Well done.
Yes, that official science is at least looking in this direction. And it's a great joy that something that the participants of the Creative Society project know and have known about for a very long time has finally become an astonishing discovery for official science. Igor Mikhailovich, in this regard, I would like to express my enormous gratitude, first of all, to you, as well as to the participants and scientists of the Creative Society project, to all the volunteers, for naturally creating precedents both in the scientific and in the social spheres in their efforts to save life and save our planet. And thanks to the fact that people do not stop, that they continue to swim, overcoming both the resistance of the river and the resistance of those who are drifting downstream, as of today, those things which were called science-fictional and exotic hypotheses are finally becoming amazing scientific discoveries and at least being brought to the level of legitimate debate.
It's actually funny what they are talking about now. We basically mentioned in the year 2005. We started talking about it then. In the year 2014, we already talked about it openly and got no support anywhere from anyone. We only received a lot of criticism. As usual, we are used to it. In fact, what they discovered, let's put it mildly, sort of precursors of an earthquake, are already secondary indicators. Not even secondary ones, to be honest. If we proceed from what we have as of today, we can say that these are secondary indicators of an imminent and inevitable earthquake. This is true. They did a good job, of course. But let's go step by step to make it clear. Initial indicators, if we proceed from what we have today, although, again, today is not quite right. As of today, the initial indicators of an imminent and inevitable earthquake in some local zone, let's say of a separate region, are actually still being studied. Many people, including those in the field, our scientists, our friends, and there are also volunteers who are trying to solve the problem. There is a certain understanding. There is already a positive dynamic in solving this problem. But we are still far from the solution. Why? There isn't a full understanding of these processes. They are working on it. But it is not so easy and not so fast, especially on a voluntary basis, all the more so as we are constantly confronted with resistance. We also have to face the fact that, let's be honest, we cannot get into all regions and we have a limited number of people and limited opportunities. But all that is secondary. We have always lived under such conditions and always worked in this direction. So, the initial indicators that should tell us of an earthquake, these very precursors should tell us at least 3 months in advance, even better 6 months, before the moment when an earthquake will inevitably happen. And as of today, let's say, such a possibility is emerging. I'll put it carefully, probably in the near future, maybe not quite so near. We will find a solution to this problem. However, this was identified already a long time ago, and back in the year 2014, we mentioned that the initial indicators were Well, at that time, frankly speaking, we thought that the initial indicator was exactly the endogenous emission of neutrinos in large quantities. We spoke about this and wrote about it. We also identified the problem of cosmic rays, the cyclicity of exactly 12,000 years. In this case, the 24,000-year cycle, let's say, which was again identified by a peculiar endogenous emission of neutrinos. But while we were studying this process, we also came across the fact that before an earthquake occurred somewhere, in that very place, a local emission of large quantities of neutrinos began, of endogenous neutrinos. At that time, and it was as far back as 2005, our scientists tried to bring this information to various experts in the field, to their colleagues, but we received nothing but criticism. Why? The first thing they said to us was, "How have you identified that neutrinos are increasing there?" We explained, showed, and told people about it. At that time, in 2005, thanks to a scientist, a very good man, and really, I would say an outstanding scientist, we were already using portable neutrino detectors, mobile ones. A lot of our people, including myself, when we had time, we used to walk in the fields with those backpacks, so to speak, and they worked great. When we showed them to those experts, they said, "That's impossible. In order to really detect neutrinos, you need," and they started telling us about their special stationary devices, which are huge pools for detecting neutrinos and registering them. We showed them, here it is, but they told us that this kind of devices worked on different principles and that we were wrong. And look, a little time has passed, and the situation has already changed radically. What was another problem? We showed and told them that a neutrino is not actually a neutrino. It interacts with other particles. It carries tremendous energy. It makes air molecules vibrate. It creates voids similar to, let's say, certain holes or power lines in places where neutrinos come out with huge openings. If you look on a large scale, not only in our atmosphere, but also in the Earth's magnetic field. And this is what alarmed us. We explained what is happening at the time when a neutrino emission takes place from a specific local point, where there is maximum conjunction of lithospheric plates, where in a short period of time, an earthquake will occur, and it will definitely occur. We explained that it is all due to the disruption of our shield, and our shield is the electromagnetic field. So, this neutrino flux, we will tell you a bit later what causes it to form. So this neutrino flux was destroying our shield locally over this area. In other words, what was taking place? The electromagnetic field. Well, I should probably explain. What is an electromagnetic field? Everyone understands it in their own way, but I'll explain it as follows. There are power lines. These power lines are like tubes, like honeycombs, like a set of honeycombs. A power line is a huge number of tubes through which energy flows. Again, if we proceed from our hypothesis, which was explained at the latest form, then everything falls into place. This is similar to the coiled and linear states of snakes. You remember that, friends, don't you? Those who don't remember and haven't seen that, please watch our recent form, and you will understand, so that I don't delve into long explanations. So these neutrinos, when they interacted with the electromagnetic field, they transformed it. These honeycombs were breaking. The lines almost collapsed partially, and everything turned into a sieve. Well, to make it clear, into a colander. You've probably seen it at home. And these holes that formed as a result of neutrino activity created conditions through which cosmic radiation began to reach the ground and go deeper. All of this was detected, meaning the initial indicator which occurs, let's say, a month before an earthquake, is a release of a large number of neutrinos. in approximately 2 weeks, a little less. From 10 to 14 days, let's put it this way. Cosmic radiation begins to come in, and when we are already on the verge, when an earthquake should happen today or tomorrow, in a day or two, solar radiation already starts reaching the Earth in large quantities too, because these holes increase even more. This resembles, to illustrate it figuratively, let's say, as of today, in the ocean, there is a huge amount of methane gas in a solid state. Due to the fact that the ocean is getting warmer, methane begins to turn into a gaseous state, and these bubbles begin to rise in the ocean. And there are many such places. What have our oceanologists who study this problem, among other things, noticed? And it is indeed interesting. In places where these huge bubbles begin to ascend in large quantities, down in the ocean, where it has always been dark, it becomes light. Why? Because due to the density and quantity of these air bubbles, oceanic water molecules disperse, and through these bubbles, the sunlight penetrates at great depths, almost to the bottom. The same situation occurs before an earthquake. And we believed, although mistakenly, but we believed that this was the initial indicator. The initial indicator is the formation of a large neutrino flux. We were told a neutrino is something that is neutral and does not interact with anything. How can it affect the Earth's electromagnetic field? We were ridiculed by eminent scientists. I could now mention their names. They are famous people, including Nobel Prize winners. Frankly speaking, these people, how to put it, they should be kept as far away from science as possible because they bring nothing but harm. Also, I'm sorry, but it's boiling over. Well, not for myself. I'm accustomed to criticism. I'm used to it. I've faced it always and everywhere. This is normal. I'm really used to it, but I feel very offended for the outstanding scientists. For example, for this good friend of ours who developed portable neutrino detectors, who, like no other scientist, came close to understanding what the neutrino is. And unfortunately, through his scientific developments, let's say, he didn't become famous, no. He didn't win the Nobel Prize, no. His works didn't even become an asset to all of humanity. But thank God we used them. The only reward he received for his labor was, I'll put it carefully, an unfortunate incident that began to be presented as an accident or a suicide. I mean, a suicide for a man who had a great desire to serve people, which he was doing. A man who had a lot of plans, our shared plans, and we had been discussing them the day before. And suddenly, something happened to him. And according to the version of those who investigated it all, the man simply decided to commit suicide because he had begun to be criticized, and supposedly that was the trigger. Look how interesting our world is, isn't it? Those who truly serve people and truly care about humanity, instead of gratitude, receive such a fate. Well, such is our world. We are used to that. So let's get back to neutrinos. It was 2005. At that time, we were indeed ridiculed. They were really rubbing our noses in various textbooks, which had been written, I'll put it carefully, by those theoreticians and plagiarists who had eminent degrees and merit in people's eyes, except that 99.9% of all those merits are someone else's merits, appropriated by these people, and the efficiency of their activity for humankind is detrimental, not beneficial at all, but detrimental. Why? Because they are standing in the way of not just certain true scientists, they are standing in the way of the entire humanity. And that's a real problem. But nowadays, thank God, owing to other enthusiastic scientists, the role and behavior of neutrinos is clear. As of today, it turns out that neutrinos are capable not only of interaction, but also of transferring enormous energy. We talked about this God knows when. But today, FFGs have already been built. Yes, based on graphene. Yes, on neutrinos, which generate electricity in the required amount in cents. The neutrino is able to contribute to the formation of a charge release. It means that it is also a charge carrier. It means that it has mass and very many other characteristics, which nowadays lots of scientists have begun to acknowledge, thank God, how much time we have wasted, how much effort and opportunities we have lost, how many human lives we have lost, and how many more we will lose because we have the consumerist format, because progressive scientists have these rocks, impenetrable rocks of authority figures standing in their way, who, like Sifa, are simply lying in the way of humanity. This is indeed true. But as of today, just look. It's a great achievement, and I am really glad for these Polish scientists who have finally seen that before an earthquake, there appears cosmic radiation that almost reaches the Earth. Well, they haven't noticed what happens with neutrinos. I can understand them. They don't have anything to measure neutrinos with. I think they would have noticed them if they had such an ability. I think they have also noticed the increase in solar radiation before an earthquake itself. That's already a lot. That's really a lot. Why? Because this is, Tatiana is right. This is already a recognition of those facts that were mentioned God knows when. But what does this give? Let's take a broader look. If we also manage to resolve the main issue, the very first indicators which will tell us 6 months or at least 3 to 6 months in advance where exactly an earthquake will occur, that will be a huge breakthrough for all humankind and will open up enormous opportunities. But unfortunately, friends, I will tell you honestly, the way it is, in the consumerist format, this knowledge is pointless. Yes, we can see that radiation has increased in some place, or, if God wills, we will be able to measure neutrinos on some official and legitimate measuring devices, on some detectors for neutrinos. Although nowadays, this can be done very simply. One can take a fuel-free generator that people have made on graphene and look at where electrical power is increasing, when and how. It shows that immediately. Well, those are already details. So in the consumerist format, yes, we will be able to detect the place that is causing a danger. And if local authorities are willing to do that, and they are not afraid for their reputations more than for the lives of people who live there, thus people's lives can be saved. But an earthquake will take place anyway. And if it is destructive, destruction will be inevitable. Yet, what can be done? Or rather, what should have been done at least 10 years ago? And we were able to do it. It is to carry out advanced, planned activities that would decrease the pressure and prevent almost any strong and powerful earthquakes. Because by the amount of those very neutrinos, yes, in advance, a month in advance, we would have already known how strong an earthquake will be and at what point, or at least 2 weeks in advance, or 10 days, judging by incoming cosmic rays. By these rays that reach the Earth, after all, it's already easy to measure this. It's not difficult, at least this way. But I'll say that when one of the last phases, or the penultimate phase occurs, when the secondary cosmic radiation actually begins to reach the Earth, it's already a little bit difficult and risky to dampen, or to be more precise, to depressurize these conjugated structures. There is already a risk. It is better to do that a month in advance, To make it clear, perhaps I will explain, okay?
Yes, it is very interesting because now scientists want to identify locations.
We've talked a
Well,
lot.
here we have depressurization of earthquakes.
Yes, we've talked a lot about this, but to make it clear, let's repeat it again. What is an earthquake? It is when one plate overlaps another. That is, the compression increases at that point. Of course, this creates a fault. That's all the textbooks say. And this fault creates this very tremor, this very earthquake. As a rule, on average, it happens at a depth of 10 kilometers. It is normal. It happens there in deep structures. To make it clear, this very growing pressure is increasing gradually. At the depth of 10 kilometers, there are already high temperatures. This is the pressure of huge masses in solid structures. What does it cause? It causes a destruction of the structures that make up these plates. When they collapse, the atoms in those structures collapse as well. And the entire subsequent process is very well explained by that hypothesis with the snakes. It turns out that not only protons are released, but also snakes, so to say. That is, they transform from the coiled states to the linear ones, and an enormous amount of neutrinos is released. I mean, what we call neutrinos. And when these streams of neutrinos rush into outer space, they interact with air molecules. Strange as it may seem, they do. That is, they weaken our atmosphere locally in that place, and they also affect the Earth's magnetic field. What does this lead to? In order to make it clear, I've already said that these power lines, just like honeycombs, are made up of clusters. Just for you to understand, those very snakes flow along these clusters at a tremendous speed, practically at the speed of light. And even though it's a weak electromagnetic field, it has such a density and such a speed that when there is cosmic radiation coming towards our planet, or radiation from the sun, these particles are captured by these flows and carried outside of our globe. So if we look at our magnetic field from a side, we will see that it is slightly flattened from the side of the sun. But from the other side, it is slightly elongated. And so this flow is simply dampening. It captures all the particles that are coming. Again, to make it clear to a wider audience, everyone knows what fast rivers are, right? Let's consider a fast river in the mountains that carries water at a tremendous speed. If we, for example, start throwing gravel off a bridge, it's a fine fraction of stone. You know what gravel is, don't you? They cover roads with it. When they repair or lay asphalt, they cover them with small stones. In theory, a stone that has fallen into the water should fall to the bottom. But if the water is flowing very fast, then even if we pour gravel from a truck and the water flow is fast enough, it will carry this gravel and spread it far away from where we're pouring it. And now, imagine that exactly in the place where we are pouring gravel, air bubbles start to rise from the bottom. Then, in spite of this fast water flow, these air bubbles will create vortices. Again, by pushing apart the water molecules, they will create such peculiar openings or holes through which gravel will fall immediately to the bottom. It's clear, isn't it? So these are exactly the conditions under which cosmic radiation penetrates freely to the ground. But that's already a late stage. Why is it a late stage? Because when the plates collide with each other, at first a small emission of, let's say, endogenous neutrinos begins. Then a huge flux builds up. This indicates that the process has already gone too far. And an earthquake at this point is almost inevitable. Well, this is more or less clear. Thus, in order to perform timely and planned depressurization, precisely at the site of plates conjunction, that is, in the place where this very earthquake will occur, we need to detect this locus at least 6 months in advance. Well, 4 or 5 months in advance. At the very least, 3 months in advance. Then, in a scheduled manner, we can perform a specific drilling with a directed explosion. Thank God, we have plenty of explosives to blow up. We have produced enough of them. By this directed and controlled explosion, we can cause, let's say, certain loosening of these structures to the extent that these plates will be relieved, and this pressure will subside. This means that for us as citizens living on this territory, this would cause an earthquake of magnitude 2 or 2.5. That's the maximum. I mean, buildings will remain intact, nothing will threaten us, and the explosion will take place at a great depth. So, there is nothing to be afraid of, and no earthquake will happen. It's clear. So we eliminate any risks. Thus, an earthquake that was supposed to be, for example, a magnitude of 7.5 to 8, which is already destructive and dangerous for us, can become absolutely non-dangerous and routine. You know, it's when even a chandelier doesn't wobble in high-rise buildings. That is, an earthquake took place somewhere and it was spotted by a seismograph, nothing more. However, if the process goes a little further, I mean, if we miss the moment, what is actually so valuable about the research conducted by people today? We would be able to detect those very initial indicators. Then we can do it right on the spot. However, if we cannot do this, and we can be guided only by neutrino emission, then in this place where an earthquake is going to occur, if there is already a significant emission of endogenous neutrinos, we mustn't perform this kind of depressurization. Why? Because instead of magnitude 7 or 8, there will already be a 20% increase, even a little bit more, but the magnitude will be no less than 10 or even higher. In other words, it will be a very serious and very destructive earthquake. Why? This can be easily explained by the following simple example. Let's imagine that a diesel locomotive is pushing a lot of cars uphill. Sort of a train. They stop at a concrete wall while this diesel locomotive keeps pushing. And then, between the first car and the concrete wall, pressure is building up. So, at a certain moment, something will fail, either the car or the concrete wall, and what we call an earthquake will occur. So imagine, when a significant, very significant pressure has already built up, and this pressure is transferred through all the cars up to the diesel locomotive which is pushing, and then we suddenly remove this first car that is between the concrete wall and the rest of the cars. A gap emerges. However, there's tremendous tension here, and at the moment we removed the first car, we created even a little greater tension. What will happen? That's right, a lot of people will say the spring begins to extend, and then a mega impact occurs, meaning a huge mass strikes at a sharply increased velocity. And there happens what? An increase in the force of the impact, that is, mass multiplied by velocity. That's right. However, if we remove the first car from the end, that is, near the diesel locomotive itself, not here, where the structures are in contact with each other, but from the diesel locomotive, what will happen? A gap will form near the force that pushes all the cars as well as between these cars. Meanwhile, the cars stand down the slope, that is, the diesel locomotive pushes them uphill, and then the pressure that was exerted on this plate, well, all this means tension. So this tension will be drastically dampened. How? We have removed the car, and thus the diesel locomotive can move a little faster. However, the entire mass, with all the pressure, will be heading towards the locomotive. And this mass will be heading towards the locomotive itself, right? Meaning, what will happen? First, depressurization will take place between the first car and the concrete wall. And at the same time, this entire mass will sharply slow down and reduce the amount of force pushing these cars, which means that the locomotive will slow down. Well, it's clear.
Very easy to understand, yes.
It's easy to understand, I hope, friends, that you have understood. I apologize for such explanations, but I did my best. So if we identify that in a certain location, there's already a lot of neutrinos. Even if there's no cosmic radiation yet, but there's a lot of neutrinos, we will be able to perform depressurization only in a place from where it is growing. That means it may be thousands of kilometers away. Not 1,000, but several thousand. And exactly there we need to perform depressurization so that the plate would simply be relieved and the pressure would go away. What would we get in such a case if we correctly identify the location? That's not complicated, friends. There are specific nuances there. We will get from a 1.5 to 2, maximum 2.5 magnitude earthquake in the right place, where we perform this depressurization, precisely where the forces are building up. And in this place, we will get a maximum magnitude 1.5 to 2. And an earthquake, which could have been magnitude 8, simply disappears. Why can't we do that in the consumerist format? I say it again. These plates are huge, and places where the forces that start pushing the plates and where we need to perform this depressurization can be thousands and thousands of kilometers away. That's the way our world is arranged. Well, I will explain it to you in order to save time. All of you are intelligent and politically savvy people. For instance, imagine a situation where neutrino emission has significantly increased in Moscow, a city with millions of inhabitants, where there are a lot of children, women, and old people. And there is a threat that forecasts an earthquake of magnitude 9 or higher, a mega earthquake. We can prevent it, but this depressurization has to be performed in Poland, in Warsaw. A lot of people have understood, right? It's already funny. I agree. They would rather accelerate the process instead of relieving the pressure. If it were the other way around, they might agree. But if such a situation arises, would they be able to reach an agreement? Perhaps they would. I don't know. I'm not a politician. They know better. But how long would that take? While in this case, we have only a few days. That's the answer. And exactly the same situation can happen, with America and with any other country in the world. Why? Because political agenda in our society prevails over our humaneness and our common sense so much that we'd rather destroy millions of people than simply remain human beings. I'll put it this way. And this is really so. In the creative society, I don't see any problems at all, which means that all this can be solved within seconds. And in this case, there cannot be any problems. Thanks to certain sensors and devices, we will be able to detect around practically the entire globe where a problem arises or is about to arise. And we'll be able to simply depressurize almost any earthquake to eliminate it. This will lead to seismic activity as such becoming absolutely controllable. The same goes for volcanology. In this case, indeed, let's put it this way, we will be able to put things in order. It doesn't mean that volcanoes won't erupt, they will, especially now that we are just entering the cycle. Why just entering? Because we're only going to enter it next year. This is where it gets fun. Why? Because what is being said now is actually frightening. Very serious people in very serious circles are saying in plain language that next year will be the first year of warming. It turns out that all the years of warming we've experienced have been periods of cooling. It is the so-called La Niña. And now, starting next year, we are going to enter the El Niño, which is a situation where there's actually going to be warming. However, that's not all. The funniest thing is that they talk about, and they do it so calmly that I was shocked. Smart people are sitting around, philosophizing, talking about the fact that a problem with water has started. Everyone knows that it has already started. Somewhere we are drowned, and at the same time, despite the fact that we are drowned, wells are becoming empty. People's aquifer wells are becoming empty. Why? The water is drying up. We've talked about it a lot, and everybody can see it, and everybody knows it. Somewhere water is appearing where it's not supposed to be, where there has always been a desert, and now it is flooding, while somewhere else, water is drying up and disappearing, and the problems are only increasing. It's a natural process. It is the natural process of this cycle. So what do smart people declare? That the next wars will be over water. They will be terrible and destructive. But we are going to fight. We are going to kill each other over water. My friends, to be honest, I understand why this is happening. Of course, I understand both causes and consequences. I do understand everything, but I don't understand this inhumanity. Have we so much stopped being humans? Has the thirst for power, or for no one knows what, predominated in us so much that in our time, when we have all the capabilities, we have the capability to desalinate seawaters. These are waters that we will never run out of. What's more, we can extract water from air. Yes, it is condensation. They'll say, what about the fields? It will be enough for the fields and for everything else. And there is a certain phenomenon here. The more we condense water from even the driest parts of our planet, the more of this water will enter our atmosphere, and the faster our oceans will be cleaned. This is really true. If we condense water from the air, it will increase the turnover of water, of moisture in the atmosphere. This will cleanse the atmosphere faster of all kinds of dust suspensions and all kinds of dirt that builds up, which creates even more problems for us. It will clean the oceans faster. Moreover, today, we can extract all the water we need from the atmosphere. That's really true. But as always, it's all about money. You see? It's not even about money. We find, look, there is another paradox. Everyone is saying that the whole world, all the countries, are preparing for water wars. So everybody is starting to arm themselves. We find money for war, but we do not find money for peace, for saving people's lives. Well, tell me, do we have the right to survive in such conditions as humanity? On the one hand, we have to survive. We are humanity. But on the other hand, the year 2024 is coming. The year that people were talking about millennia ago. The one that we've been talking about for several decades. The one that we were even joking about 10 years ago. When this warming, these problems started, we said, oh, for God's sake, it's not the year 2024 yet. But what is the year 2024? Just to make it clear, we are actually beginning to enter the cycle. It is the first year of the cycle. But for us, for humans, if we abstract ourselves a little bit and explain it allegorically, it's like we, all of humanity, have climbed to the top of a cliff, and now we have only one way, downhill. And the question is, where? Into the abyss or into the heavenly gardens? Where shall we go? So this is the time of our choice, where we're going. And when I hear such predictions for the future, it makes me sad, frankly speaking. You see? But in reality, what can change the situation? If a lot of people say the creative society, they will be right. That's the only option. When, instead of the abyss, we can roll down from this mountaintop to Eden, and indeed, it is safe, it is promising, it will give. Well, it will give a lot to each of us, and most importantly, it will preserve our planet and all of us. But it will also open up future prospects for all of humanity to live in peace, to live in joy, to live in a world where the highest value is human life and human benefit. Just notice, that is to say, it is the world in which all science is focused on one thing, how to make our lives better and easier, how to make each of us healthier, how to prolong our lives, and how to make us truly happy. Or there is an alternative scenario, which is likely not so alternative. Why? Because think about it. There are over 8 billion of us on this planet right now. 5 people out of 1,000 know about the Creative Society. Not those who've seen something about it, but those who know what it is and want to support it. These are the realistic numbers. Yes, it is possible to convey this information to everyone quickly, but we're doing our best. So far, and thank goodness it's already 5 people. After all, just a year ago, even 5 people per 1,000 didn't know. But unfortunately, it's not 995 people. It is 5 people. And simple math shows that anything can happen. Yet, what would the Creative Society give us? Let's go back, for example, to that very volcanology. And look, today, there is a proposal that in order to stop this climate calamity looming over us, we need to cool the ocean. Thank you. You already realize that the ocean is the cause, that our air conditioning is actually broken, and everyone is in trouble. So what do they propose? In fact, at the international level, they support a lot of research that focuses on different ways and methods that will contribute to the reflection of sunlight in order to cool our planet. And naturally, one of the methods is to spray certain substances in our atmosphere. It would seem logical. It is simple and clear. However, many people are actually alarmed, and not without reason, that this method may have a side effect that will lead to the death of the entire population and the planet as a whole. Why? I will try to explain it simply and more or less clearly. What do they suggest? They suggest to spray certain substances over the ocean so that the sun doesn't heat it up so much. On the one hand, they're right. About what? About the fact that our atmosphere has really shrunk. Cosmic rays and a stronger solar radiation get to the surface of our land and oceans, and in much greater amounts. So, naturally, everything heats up faster. But our problem is not in the factor which is coming from above to the ground. Our problem is much deeper. It's in the core. This process of cyclicity and this radiation which, like that very neutrino, passes through it all almost without interacting with anything. It interacts with the core of our planet. So the entropy effect is formed there. When there is an emission from our inner core to the outer core, insane heating takes place. And the liquid overheated magma starts to produce what we have now. So it's the magma that starts heating everything from the inside. And if we now cover the ocean with sprayed substances, there will be a big disaster. On the one hand, it seems to be logical. We would limit the solar radiation and sort of eliminate additional warming. But whatever we spray, we would cause, let's just say that any particles, any suspended solids in the atmosphere where there is a lot of electricity, they receive certain charges. They begin to interact with our atmosphere, and a certain tension occurs. To make it clearer, I'll put it simply. Take a magnet, a neodymium magnet. Put it into an electric field, and you will see very interesting phenomena. Those who need it will understand. We'll see the same effect if we start spraying anything. And why would we spray it? I'll put it simply. Why bother? First of all, it's hard to make it stay over the ocean. It's unrealistic because the whole atmosphere is moving. It is much easier to cover a huge area and cause a so-called winter. Not a nuclear winter, but literally a prolonged winter. All it takes is to provoke an eruption of Yellowstone, right? After all, it's easy to do. One tactical bomb, low in power. Yellowstone doesn't need much. and the whole world would plunge into chaos. I mean, what Yellowstone will spew will be enough to cover almost all of our planet with this suspension. And excuse me, there's a huge amount of microcrystalline compounds that will reflect anything. It's going to be a dense shield. Except that this shield won't prevent that specific cyclic radiation from coming, which nonetheless reaches the core. And what is under our feet will heat up, while here it will cool down. The same processes that are now taking place under our feet will continue, but the heat that is being generated will not be able to escape. And then we may encounter a serious paradox. Instead of cooling, we will, on the contrary, heat up everything. And the problem isn't even that. The problem is that there are enough negative processes going on already. And if the caldera explodes, God forbid, then, as we typically observe today, Yellowstone is connected with another caldera. So, other volcanoes will definitely be triggered in huge numbers. Why? Let me try to explain. We now see a whole series of volcanic eruptions taking place, even after the latest form where we spoke about this, It is so revealing that a whole series of eruptions occurred within a short period of time, as if on purpose. Although, as a matter of fact, we foresaw that and we talked about it at the forum. Why is such activity taking place? Because when this radiation collides with the planet's core, it releases a huge amount of energy. Due to this energy, heating takes place already on the outer core. Magma that erodes everything from the inside produces this heating. Plus, an expansion occurs. And this very expansion affects not only volcanoes. That goes without saying because red-hot magma reaches those very volcanoes, old rivers, channels, and everything else. But it is also pressing on the plates. That's why we see such a tremendous increase in seismic activity. This is indeed so. Moreover, it is observed where it never happened before, due to these very expansions that are taking place. While, the rise of a plate, even by 1 centimeter, imagine this mass, and the force of energy that really raises the plate by a centimeter, or somewhere. On the contrary, the plate is pressed inwards. And these redistributions are, like a ball or a balloon. If we squeeze it on the sides, we see that on the other side it begins to stretch out, right? Thus, forces are redistributed. The plates start moving much faster. Moreover, nobody canceled gravitational forces, which are now increasing. This is really true. Also, there are centrifugal forces. Well, this is what causes the plates to move. So imagine, in addition to centrifugal forces and gravitational interactions, there also arises an internal pressure due to an increase in the expansion of magma. Well, all this is a natural process of events today. This is what we mentioned a long time ago, and we can see it all right now. Thus, it is clear that this is not the best way out. Let's say, in order to avoid an activation of that very caldera and the end of humanity, it is possible to perform degassing. Again, what is degassing? Egon Chalakian described it quite well at the latest forum. He's an outstanding scientist of our time. He said it right, that the keys to this problem are in his hands. This is really so. He is one of those people who were far from being the last to start talking about it and studying these processes, so he understands and knows a lot. It is clear that, again, I will try to explain it, at least by simple examples. For instance, as of today, the problem is seriously aggravating in the caldera, the most famous and well-known one. There are processes going on which indicate that not everything is as good as some people are trying to explain to us. I'll put it gently and carefully. At any moment, something may happen that all of us do not want. How to avoid this problem? Earlier, I said that the calderas are interconnected. They are interconnected by flows of magma, which is under enormous pressure, and they constantly circulate and interchange. So, these forming rivers are exactly the source of pressure, and under any caldera, a huge bubble is formed, which is directly connected to this river. This river is washing and continuously eroding the plates more and more, and it erodes passages for itself upwards. Under the most famous caldera, this passage has already been eroded very significantly, and we can see that by all indicators. What should we do? A simple question. We should remove pathological pressure, meaning excess pressure. Again, this means to perform that very degassing. That is, in simple terms, we should drill a hole and release what is excessive, like gas is released from a bottle of champagne. If someone has once opened it, if possible, it just pops, and everything pours out. Well, you've seen it on TV. If you didn't, try it yourselves. Or you can release the gas gently and slowly, and that's it. Nothing fizzles or pours out. Why is that so? Because it's a controlled process. However, if we try to do this in that very caldera, we will definitely activate it. This is indeed true. Even if we drill not too deep, we will break. Even with a small device, in a small hole, we can provoke an activation. By disrupting the stability, we can really provoke an activation of the caldera. Yet, in order for this not to happen, we need to drill in a completely different place. While this is very easy to find nowadays, there are systems that study our planet from those very satellites and all that. We actually see those flows. We see them being formed, and thermal imagers show everything. We can find the most convenient place in a completely different area, so to say. Or to put it simply, if the caldera is located in America, we can perform degassing in a completely different part of our planet. We can drill a hole and carefully and slowly release the excess gas. Thus, a terrible explosion cannot emerge in that place, but it can emerge and is almost inevitable in the caldera. While there, it can all be controlled. In another location. Yet, we will have to release a lot of lava anyway. Now let's imagine, in our consumerist format, we will not name the locations. All this is secondary. But I'll put it as follows. We will have to pour lava over one of the most famous resorts. Will certain people agree? A simple question. I think they won't. Because they don't care about that country at all. And they think that their land is more important. As for what is there, it doesn't concern them. However, it turns out it does concern them. It turns out that the processes which are taking place right now under that resort area are also connected in a single process because the same magma river is flowing quite close to that place, which connects several calderas and dozens of other quite serious volcanoes that will actually become active one by one due to the activation of one caldera. And why? This is also a good question. Again, oddly enough, many people, even those very volcanologists, have been arguing with us and saying that we are mistaken. As always, we are the stupidest. Why? Because we allegedly do not understand simple things. If a caldera erupts, it releases all the excess pressure. It just pours it all out, and that's it. It's all relieved. Just imagine, we allegedly do not understand that everything is so simple. However, we assert that if an eruption of the caldera begins, let's say of the most famous one, another caldera will also erupt, and a mass of volcanoes will immediately become active. Moreover, very severe earthquakes will start. Why? It would seem that, on the contrary, everything should abate when a cork from a champagne bottle pops out, right? It's like the excess is gone, while everything else remains. And here the most interesting moment comes. It turns out that if it were simply between the cycles, then basically, something like that would occur. Although the last eruption of the same famous volcano, that very caldera, showed that there was also activation of other volcanoes. However, now the cycle is not even 12,000. But 24,000 years. And we can see that the activity of that radiation is very high, that we are ahead of all forecasts. And that pressure which is growing under our feet, there, in the inner core and the outer core, and naturally already in the mantle and everywhere, and that which affects our so-called lithospheric plates, meaning our crust. This very activity is extremely pathological, and volcanic activity is absolutely pathological too. In other words, it shouldn't be happening, but it is there. Why? In this cycle, we are even ahead of the curve. At the latest forum, we discussed and said that the problem is that the immunity of our planet no longer exists. I mean, we have nearly killed the ocean, and a cycle, a chain reaction has begun. So imagine, right there under our feet, everything is seething and boiling. This is indeed a process of boiling, but it's in a closed vessel. Yes, there is a lot of energy. Everything is boiling and seething, but it is restrained by the crust. Now, there are small eruptions, but they don't mean anything. They are immediately dampened by our plates. And basically, something erupts there a little bit, and it's a minor effect. However, this very minor activity actually indicates that we are 100% right. If a caldera eruption occurs, there will be a huge release of magma, energy, and everything else. And the pressure inside our planet will sharply drop. And at this point, a phenomenon will begin. Everything that is inside, the entire magma, will boil up. Temperature will rise several times instantaneously, and the volumes of magma will instantly increase several times. Thus, it is almost an instantaneous process, and it would seem that this sudden, tremendous discharge is supposed to relieve the pressure, but instead it will create conditions for intensification of the boiling process. Hence, the volumes of magma will increase, which means that mega explosions, cavitation explosions will start and increase the amount of magma and pressure on the plates even more. And let's say the rest of volcanoes will pop out like corks from bottles. That will be quite cheerful. Why? This is not a sad scenario. It is really something that is easy to calculate mathematically and to prove experimentally. You want to check it? Let's just say, I don't recommend doing it. But we understand perfectly well that if, let's suppose, we fill a closed metal flask with water and throw it into a fire, what happens after a while? It explodes. If we make a little hole, I emphasize, this megavolcano is a little hole on the planet, then it will explode much faster. This is really so. It would seem that through this hole, all the boiling water is supposed to pour out, that this entire boiling water should relieve pressure, and that's it. No, there is a provocation, and everything intensifies many times. And that's when the flask is completely torn apart much faster, you know, like a balloon. Then it would be torn from a heating process. And the same thing, well, everything is repeated, and in fact, the mechanism is almost the same. So in order to avoid this, it is necessary and possible, even today, let's say, not only to predict, but also to prevent it all. I mean, we can already practically manage volcanic activity as of today, but we won't be able to do that. Why? Again, I will answer with a simple example, friends, so that no one has any hope in their head that we are people, we can come to an agreement, we will solve it, we are actually reasonable beings, reasonable, and perhaps this is precisely our problem, that we reason too much. Yet for 19 years, 193 countries have been approving and signing a treaty on the safety of our ocean.
The treaty has been recently adopted at last.
19 years, friends, at the time when experts saw that the ocean was dying. And we were solving this issue so fast. Imagine if 19 years ago we would have been heard, and other scientists would have been heard. After all, many people were reaching out and raising the alarm. And that's why 193 countries, under the UN auspices, actually began to consider this most important document.
Adopted it.
Yes, after 19 years. Imagine how much time it will take us to agree to merely depressurize the plates and prevent an earthquake. Or, speaking of serious things already, of volcanology, so that we can perform planned degassing. Meanwhile, as of today, planned degassing implies hundreds of artificially created volcanoes. Some of these places fall not only on beautiful beaches, but also, on populated cities. However, everything there will have to be covered with lava. This is indeed necessary. Then there will be no problems. In the creative society, I don't see any problems at all. All this is done easily and simply. There are no problems. No one loses anything, and everyone only wins. But what does it give? Let me explain. Imagine we have depressurized those rivers of magma in a planned and calm manner. It turns out that the bubbles which are formed under those megavolcanoes are discharged. That is, the pressure simply drops like in a balloon. Magma is released, and the swelling shrinks. But a cooled magma forms an extremely dense layer. I would put it this way, something that resists this heating temperature much better than the plates do. These surface compounds that remain from the magma are much more solid, and they are more heat resistant than what our plates are made of at that depth. This is kind of like a filled tooth, a well-filled tooth. It's a guarantee that we can totally forget about this volcano for thousands of years. Nothing will ever happen to it. Thus, if we perform proper degassing across the world, we will be able to live peacefully for millennia. And we won't be threatened, by either earthquakes or volcanoes. And if we also approach the ocean in the right way, we will be able to clean it and make it work. This is realistic. There's nothing complicated here, and everything can be solved, but not in the consumerist format. Why? This is expensive. I mean, money is more precious than our lives. Think about it. Money that we people invented is more precious and valuable than our lives. People, are we sane? A simple question. How sane are we, in fact? What diagnosis should we, the entire humanity, be given? What if someone looked from the outside at what is happening on our planet, at what we kill each other for, and why we condemn ourselves? I'll put it carefully. To bad consequences, just because we invented money. We should have rather invented something good. So, friends, if we look honestly, as of today, we have everything we need to preserve life on this planet. We have all the capabilities, we have technology, we have a solution to all these issues. We have specialists, we have everything except either the mind or the creative society, so as to take advantage of it all. It turns out to be weird, but this is indeed some kind of a dead end. Although I think there is a way out of it, and everyone will say, yes, the way out is the creative society. I understand, this is really so, but it seems to me that the most important thing right now is responsibility. Everyone's responsibility, common sense, and a sober view of current events. How to convey this to people? The question is very good, but this is our responsibility. If we know what is happening, and if someone doesn't even want to hear us because of some personal interests of theirs or for some other reasons, whatever they are, then we have to understand that if we have at least any chance to save this world, that's our responsibility. The responsibility of every sensible person. There's no other way to say it. And there's another very curious fact. A pronounced activity is now starting on the Sun. Whereas quite recently, if we recall, when we talked about it, and again, it was mentioned at the latest form, that on all the planets of our solar system, due to this very cyclical radiation, various anomalous manifestations, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, and many other things are happening. Thus, it is clear that too much excess energy is generated in the bowels of all our planets. We were told that If this were the case, then it would, first of all, be reflected on the sun. We questioned them and said, "Excuse us, but let's compare the sun and all the planets in our solar system. It is the same as a children's scooter and a huge bus. It takes time for this to be manifested on the sun." They told us, if it's already manifested on other planets, it would have definitely manifested on the sun. Since there is more energy, it means the sun is supposed to become more active and more powerful. It should have increased its radiation, including the one coming towards our planet, but this is not happening. On the contrary, our star, our sun, is calming down. Nothing is happening on it. Which, in the understanding of those fellows who asserted this to us, indicates that there can be no 12,000-year or 24,000-year cycle of any kind at all. Now I have a question. We told you that a little time will pass and the sun will manifest itself. Isn't that so? It's just that, you see, sometimes I am simply amazed at how people with international statuses, very smart people, judging by their papers, titles, and everything else, do not understand elementary, simple things. In order to heat something small, less energy is needed, while in order to heat something big, you need more energy. This is what we're now observing. So, who can now say that the cycle doesn't exist if they look at our sun today, at what is really happening on it? Isn't this an influence of some kind of incomprehensible radiation which we, people, haven't explored yet, and which affects all the planets of our solar system? And it turns out that it already affects the sun itself by bringing excess energy, as a result of which we observe those flares on the sun and a release of this excess heat and this energy, even in our direction, in the direction of our planet. What can be said in this regard? I'll say one thing. Friends, we are really in trouble. Our trouble is, first and foremost, in our heads. It is that we deny a lot. We stumble against many things, indeed, like mountains, sheer cliffs that are impossible either to get around or to break through. All this is tritely because the consumerist format predominates not only in our lives, but also in our heads. If we change this entire paradigm of consumption to creation, a lot will change. Then we will be able to respond to all challenges in a timely manner. And I'm sure we will be able to resist any challenges that nature brings us. We are human beings. There is a soul in each of us. And the soul is something much greater than this whole world altogether. I mean the material world, because the soul is a part of the boundless world, the divine world which creates all this matter. No matter how science fictional it may sound, eventually, all of us will understand. Each of us, any atheist, will understand that there is both God and the devil, and that life is given to us for a reason. It is not given for us to argue, resist, and all the more to take each other's lives. Life is given to us here in this world so that we can gain something much greater and much more valuable than what we possess here. However, we are obliged to preserve even what we are given, despite the entire resistance and despite all the difficulties we face. If we are human beings, we must understand our own responsibility and must do everything in our power to keep our conscience clear. Therefore, friends, in any case, it's not a time to give up. Now is the time of our responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Igor Mikhailovich.
Thank you, friends. Peace be with you and God's love.